Hey folks, my name is Dustin Siggins, Proven Media Solutions. And this week we're going to talk about lobbying, PR, and how together they create public affairs, but also when PR should not be part of the lobbying conversation in DC, in the States, with legislatures, with presidents, governors, and even regulators. I'm here with Conor, Shawn, and Evan. And hey guys, please introduce yourselves, and we'll start with Shawn, the lone registered lobbyist in the room.
Thanks, Dustin. Appreciate the invitation, and it's great to be here with you, Conor and Evan. And yeah, I'm Shawn Friesen. I'm a principal with Chamber Hill Strategies here based here in Washington, D.C. We're a healthcare lobbying firm, and we pride ourselves on being bipartisan and working not only on Capitol Hill, but in the administration as well. A lot of credit goes to our founder, Jennifer Bell, who set us up as a firm and a certified women-owned business over 15 years ago. And we really do take pride in the work that we do, representing our clients on Capitol Hill and in the administration and the agencies, and partnering with them just to ensure that we're serving them, their advocacy goals, and advancing their agenda so that they can better serve the people and many times patients that they're serving in the healthcare space. And so thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Sure. Conor, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Conor. I'm with Milk and Honey PR. We're a boutique PR agency based in New York City. We also have offices in London, Munich, and Singapore. We're a full service PR firm, so we represent mostly ambitious high growth companies in your standard mainstream business industries, tech, healthcare, energy. And we're also the highest scoring B Corp PR firm worldwide. So we have a lot of clients and specialties in the broader impact and sustainability space.
Sure.
But I think one of the reasons I'm here is I got my start in politics and public affairs, and I transitioned to the PR industry from that about 8 years ago. So I have some experience walking the halls of Congress, representing special interest groups and policy debates, and engaging in a lot of complex legislative initiatives. So look forward to speaking to the role that communications and PR can play in that.
Evan?
Yeah, I'll round us off. Evan Harris, I'm with BPD. Our big tagline is we're delivering the future to healthcare's leading brands. But what that really means, and similar to what Conor said, is we do a little bit of everything for our clients. Marketing. I sit in the comms reputation world. AI has become a big topic of how do we position clients. But I think Conor takes the cake for having the coolest office locations. I thought we had good ones until I heard all those, but we're big offices in Boca Raton, Florida, and then we have a Nashville office, so not terrible places to go. And yeah, why I'm here too, similar to Conor, I started in public affairs, government as well. I actually feel like I'm one of the few people who maybe got a degree in something in poli-sci and actually went and did it, which now I look back at it and maybe cringe and laugh at, but worked in the California state legislature way too long. Got out at some stops at Edelman, but yeah, I've been in healthcare for 3+ years. Love it. And I try to bring in the public affairs angle, which is not as common. So I'm glad there's some like-minded folks on the discussion today.
Now, one of the reasons I brought everyone together, my company, Proven Media Solutions, a few months ago put out a white paper, and Shawn was very generous in providing a very, very supportive quote on that white paper. The topic we were looking at is we looked at open secrets, and we discovered this, looking at the trend, the first year of a new presidency, there's going to be about $4 billion, maybe more, spent on lobbying across the country. There's a newer presidential administration. You have the state legislatures, 48, I think, Evan and Conor, 48 state legislatures this year. There's a ton of money going into this. And sometimes PR is a great partner because it's a grass tops or grassroots campaign, or it's a long-term campaign. But sometimes, as the PR is not the best partner. Maybe the client doesn't have a good strategy. The client doesn't have a budget. Do you want to sacrifice the lobbying side for PR, or they're working in classified national security issues, or anything in the public would be bad for the government contractor for the niche issue that we're tackling here. So got these gentlemen together because lobbying has a bad word. I worked on the Hill as well for a Republican member out of Texas. The first thing I discovered is you have to say y'all. Apparently, I'm from New Hampshire. That was a foreign concept. But as we got through this, I realized, again, from the outside, it's always been lobbyists or dirty creatures who, bribe everybody. But when you're on the Hill, you see that they bring in a level of expertise. No single member of Congress, no single member of the state legislature can be an expert on everything. And lobbyists are a key part of that First Amendment conversation, representing average people, small businesses, big businesses, who have a right to speak to their government. So, Shawn, lead us off here in how do you see lobbying this year? How has it been as much as you expected, as busy as you expected? And how do you and your colleagues, both lobbyists generally, but also at Chamber Hill, seek to work with the public affairs side of, the PR side of public affairs?
Yeah, no, thanks, Dustin. I think with respect to, like, to take your first question, certainly it's been busy, and we expected as such. I don't know if I could have put a weight onto how busy I would have expected it to be or not, but whenever you have a new administration in particular, and particularly when there's a change in party controlling things, that makes for a particularly active few months of an administration. And obviously we've seen that be the case with the new Trump administration and with the Republican majorities, no matter how narrow they may be. They've been very aggressive and been very active. And so that has given us cause to be very active as well. First and foremost, what's been consuming most of our time has been around the budget reconciliation process. And certainly there's a significant amount of things that are happening within that space, healthcare wise, but we're also looking ahead, knowing that there's a lot of things that are not going to get touched on in reconciliation that Congress will still need to be looking at going forward. Yeah, question.
I just want to interrupt for a moment. So just for those who are less aware of budget reconciliation, there's a lot of talk about tariffs. There's a lot of talk about different major perceived and actual major things. Why is budget reconciliation taking up so much of your time when there's things like tariffs or other matters that are being discussed as well at a significant level?
Yeah, I think fundamentally some of it has to do with how we are structured here at Chamber Hill. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we certainly do engage with the administration and the executive agencies, but a lot of our work also takes place on Capitol Hill. And really, if you look at what is key for the Trump administration and enacting their legislative agenda, it is this budget reconciliation process, which involves with Congress passing, both houses of Congress passing the same budget. It does not need to be signed into law by the president. Otherwise, it's not a binding piece of law, but it sets the stage under the Budget Control Act for an expedited process for Congress to consider significant changes, particularly to federal mandatory spending and entitlements. Also significant, it makes it easier to deal also in the revenue space as well, so taxes. And so that is where a big portion of our attention is coming into play, because there's a need to find savings, if you will, and healthcare is certainly a significant part of that equation, given the amount of federal dollars that are dedicated to Medicaid and Medicare, Medicaid in particular, in this budget reconciliation process. So good question, and hopefully that answers it well. With respect to tariffs, we don't engage in that at this time too much. Hopefully maybe we'll find some clients that would like us to. But at this point, we're not engaging too much in that, though we do follow it closely, and so we're certainly keeping an eye on those things also. And with respect to how we engage in the public relations and external facing space, we talk with our clients, and they oftentimes will have others that they work with around getting their message out, whether it be in their local communities or more broadly. But I think one of the values that we can find, in the public affairs space is oftentimes when I know like work like you do, Dustin, when there is that op-ed by a thought leader or
Mhm.
an article that touches on some of the challenges that our clients are facing, it really can be helpful for us in making the case in the conversations that we have with policymakers. I think I think one of the reasons lobbyists sometimes are painted with particular brushes is that we have spent time in the process and are familiar with it, and oftentimes
Right.
have come up through the political process. And so there's this sense that, oh, lobbyists are part of an inner club, or they're just friends with policymakers. And certainly relationships are key and important, but relationships are only part of the equation, and oftentimes are really the key to just setting up a meeting and starting the conversation. If you don't have the facts behind your case, if you don't have a good policy argument behind your case, if you
Mhm.
don't have a story that connects to that lawmaker back at home, the job that you have becomes much, much harder. And so that's why I think there can be a really important role for public relations and public affairs to come into play when it comes to our advocacy work. And so, here at Chamber Hill, we are really engaged when it comes to thinking about how can we strategically bring in these other voices? How can we help our clients develop their message, not only before policymakers, but more broadly. And then through that, that's hopefully how we can then affect policy and affect change. So that's how we work at Chamber Hill, and a little bit of what we're doing right now.
And over to you, Evan. Let's talk a little bit about how what Shawn talked about at the federal level. How does that compare to what you're seeing in California? In your experience in the state legislature versus walking the halls of Congress. And then Conor, will pivot to you to kind of talk about your state and federal experience and again, how PR and related practitioners work with people like Shawn.
Yeah, I think budget reconciliation, it sets up this conversation well and what we can say where and I was going to add on, Shawn or Dustin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but reconciliation, it really cuts out, filibuster. Think of all
Correct.
the things
Yeah.
Democrats would use to slow things down. That's not available. So I find it
Right.
funny, we're always like, Congress, go faster, do something. And now
Yes.
we're going at warp
Mhm.
speed, and it's like, holy hell, slow down. What are you guys
Right.
doing? So
Right.
funny irony there. Um, California is interesting. I saw a little bit of it earlier this year of you would have hospital CEOs, you had association presidents, leadership boards going to
Mhm.
DC, starting the early lobbying, the early conversations in the spring.
Mhm.
Dustin, your guys' white paper talks about this congressional recess in district days. When
Yes.
folks are coming back, it's, targeting paid media, it's
Yeah.
targeting digital ads, it's
Mhm.
getting them on the ground issues, standing up landing pages. So
Yep.
I think these two pieces, you've seen it in budget reconciliation where it works so well together, where you
Mhm.
have some of the DC work in Sacramento, you have talking to the governor, any federal agency folks that are based out here. But then you have this, we think of it as this, you need this cascade, you need all these little different touch points where it can't
Yep.
just be siloed. And I think that's
Right.
where some folks get stuck of like, well, we have a lobbyist. Well, we placed an op-ed. And we all
Mhm.
know any good comms plan, strategic comms plan, you need all the different touch points. And to what Shawn said, getting in the room, getting in the door. At BPD, when we think about public affairs with health systems, or we're trying to make an argument to a client, it's showing up early, it's educating,
Mhm.
it's showing up often. And if you're
Yep.
not doing that, when budget reconciliations flying through or state bills
Right.
flying through, like you're stuck, you're going to be the last person that's trying to get in to see a chief of staff, a lawmaker. Um, Second point, and I think it's just important to note out here in Sacramento, you've seen a lot of lobbying firms, some of the bigger ones that are located downtown, they've invested heavily in PR. So they're bringing those capabilities instead of going to the traditional agency or a public affairs agency. They're bringing all that in-house, which I think shows the tremendous value is they're
Mhm.
recognizing, hey, if this is more
Right.
unified, we can help push these things out as we're doing the, capital L lobbying that we traditionally do. Let's do our
Right.
PR, let's do our PA and public affairs work. I think they've recognized the value in that. I mean, sucks if you're a traditional PA agency. It means you're looking for someone like Shawn or another partner. But I think it just shows they're investing and out here
Right.
it's been kind of this lobbying PR industrial complex happening, and
Yep.
this little bit of a shift. So interesting trends from the state side, and I'll add more, but good place to stop.
Connor?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is, the 2024 election for a lot of people in the PR industry was supposed to be kind of this light at the end of the tunnel moment for us because we had a lot of the last year and a half, 2 years was really up and down. And anytime you get into a moment of political uncertainty, that leads to
Right.
indecision, in the C-suite, which leads to non-committal for
Right.
PR consultants. And that's exactly what we were seeing. I mean, 2024, we were of the mind of, listen, if it's Vice President Harris, that's great. If it's President Trump, that's also great because we finally have some stability. And
Decision making one way or the other that you
yeah,
can then
yeah.
take action on.
And
Right.
I think that hasn't fully come to fruition because of everything that's gone on with the tariffs. That's just led to another element and a different kind of uncertainty. Um, but I piggyback what both Shawn and Evan said. I think Evan, you really touched on it towards the end of your remarks. There is any part of an external communications effort has to be coordinated. And in my world, which is a little less public affairs than what I've, earlier in my career, I speak to a lot of clients that may come to us because they say, hey, we really need earned media help. We need you to get us more headlines. We need you to get us more byline placements. And I'll say, great, we can do that. But that's one peg of the table here. There's a lot more things you can do. And just like, Evan, you had someone say, oh, well, we have someone that does that. Someone will say, yeah, we have someone that does social media. But I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
is it coordinating with earned media and is it coordinating with paid and is it all
Mm-hmm.
telling the same story? So I think
Right.
that's the same mindset that lobbying needs to take is what Shawn is saying in the office to that Congress member, to that senator, isn't the same thing you're going to be saying to the general public, isn't the same thing that, the PR strategy is going to be saying, but it needs to be coordinated. And if you're
Right.
not singing the same tune, then, you're going to be playing catch up with your competitors.
Well,
And
and
and Dustin, real quick, Connor,
oh,
I mean, first you saying, hey, I want earned media and op-ed placed. Yeah, what else? Like, can we frame that and just shove that to clients every time they say that? Because that obviously,
right.
Shawn, I'm sure you get that too. And it's just like, gosh, there's such a bigger piece there.
Yeah.
So like, I appreciate that because we hear that and it's just such a small piece of the pie of even, I mean, media is getting decimated. And there's so many other ways to get to these audiences, and folks are just like,
Right.
get me in the New York Times, and it's like, okay, well,
Good
that's
luck with that.
yeah,
Well, and two, on the flip side, like again, I must stand in defense of op-eds. It's probably 90% of what we do. It's finding authors and writing and placing op-eds. But to your point, if you just do that, you're missing out on turning that op-ed into a part of an ad campaign or driving organic traffic. You talked about the different touch points, Evan. We call that surround sound marketing and branding, whether it's in the business world or in politics, where the job of lobbyist is to, as you said, Shawn, open the door, but it's got to be like that first Harry Potter movie where the envelopes are flying in the windows and the chimney and everywhere else. Because and Shawn, I'd like to hear your feedback on this. If you wait until you have the handshake on a fast moving issue, is it something's too late by the time the lobbyist opens that door? One of the points we had in our outline here is, sometimes that public pressure is needed. So, Shawn, how often do you find that the public pressure starts after the handshake, after that door is opened by the lobbyist, or before? Because there's maybe a faster moving issue, or the member is new, or some other thing that means you don't have that existing relationship.
Mhm. There certainly are times when you aren't really able to have a glide path, if you will, um, towards building uh, a relationship. An election happens and then things start to move very quickly. We've certainly seen that with some of the offices that we are having to engage with now as this budget reconciliation process moves forward. And some members of Congress have only been here now for barely 5 months, and so an audit, then they didn't have a context of engaging here in Washington.
Sure.
But I think that, I know you talked about in your white paper, and I know Evan touched on this earlier too, how, when you're in public affairs, and I think this goes to lobbying as well, you're never really on vacation. And
True.
and I think, and the key for that is I think when I see one of our clients, and they've been doing work over an extended period of time with some of their congressional delegation, but they were doing events back in the district, back in their community, multiple years
Hmm.
in the past, so that now they have developed a relationship with one of their lawmakers in particular, who's an important decision maker in the current budget reconciliation process. And they did that by engaging that lawmaker in community events and
Mhm.
in engaging that lawmaker in local opportunities to engage the community, through different types of charitable work, different types of outreach, different types of health fairs. And it's been really a helpful thing that they did on their own, through their own coordinated strategy, but has been helpful in setting a foundation for us as we advocate for them in their work during this reconciliation process. Sometimes, it's hard for me to kind of put a percentage on it, if you will, but I think the best lobbying always is lobbying that has set a foundation in the past when things weren't really happening, if you will, or weren't
Sure.
percolating.
Yep. Before
But
you even
then
make the ask, they have
you
the
weren't really
relationship.
having to make an ask, or the ask was a
Right.
soft ask, and you were just able to tell your story. I know that's often things, I know you guys work in really telling stories, but I think that's one of the things that's so important to
Sure.
advocacy, is how do you get your story out there? And if people are familiar with your story before you have a big need, before you have a crisis, uh, they're much more interested in acting on your behalf because they feel there's a partnership. And I think that can be really helpful for policymakers if they feel they have a partnership with stakeholders in their community. And so I think that's so important work where PR and public affairs can really come into setting that stage for building that partnership with policymakers.
Now, Connor and Evan, I want to get your reaction to the following as well, but pivoting to Connor for a moment. You both talked about how you have public affairs in your background, but it's not the primary focus of your organization. So when you're looking at your business clients that want to make an impact, whether federally or in the state or maybe county or local levels, is it usually the case that you have to show them, hey, let's make this case to these people in a public affairs fashion on top of maybe your government affairs department or whatever? Or is it usually they say to you, hey, we've been working together at X amount per month for this kind of focus, and we're not sure what to do, guide us. Well, how does that conversation, Connor, usually happen? And if
Yeah.
you can tie that to, how you bring PR into the other public facing tools we've already touched on, ads, social, it'd be really great to understand how that conversation happens with business clients who may now have a public affairs or lobbying need.
Yeah. I think it's important to start with, let's define the difference between public relations and public affairs, because
Sure.
it's extremely nuanced, and I think they're sometimes used interchangeably.
Mhm.
To me, there's two main areas. PR, generally speaking, has a broader audience. Public affairs has a narrower audience. So PR is media, influencers, the general public. Public affairs it's usually a policy-driven effort. So it's going to be policymakers, think tanks, regulators, whatever it may be. Um, but I actually think the execution of both is so similar. So when we've had current clients that have come to us with more of a public affairs need, the
Mhm.
transition's been very seamless. And we've
Okay.
had both scenarios that you laid out, Dustin, have happened with our current client base in Milk and Honey, where we've had a client come to us and say, we have um, not a legislative objective, but we have a policy objective. We have a broader political objective, and
Mhm.
we want PR to, forward that objective. We've also
Sure.
been in situations where we've been working with a client for a year or 2 years, and then they've said, "Hey, everything you've done in building our reputation has been so great. You're telling our story. We now want to apply that to this political thing we want to accomplish." Um,
Okay.
So I think the reason it is such a seamless transition and it works so much in concert is at the end of the day, it's storytelling. At the end of the day, it's taking a step back and saying, what is our narrative? What do we want? How do we want to shape opinion, whether that opinion is of lawmakers or of the general public? And, what do we have at our disposal to do that? Is it a byline? Is it a social media campaign? Is it working with, I mean, we've worked with clients and connecting them with local elected officials and doing public events and stuff like that. So there really hasn't been a huge jump to, what our expertise is as a traditional PR agency to what our clients need to accomplish from a public affairs perspective.
And Evan, what's been your experience?
I'd say it's a mix of client, depends on the client, but what I've seen from mid-size and what I've experienced is folks will come in, take out national health systems that have very robust
Sure.
government affairs, public, like think mid-size, smaller state or regional. They usually either have one person who does public affairs or government relations, whatever you want to call that. And they're very, it's all tracking bills, looking out for roadblocks, looking out for regulatory changes. Usually they're just underwater. And so it's very hard to get them to think about other strategic needs or even pull their head up to focus on like, hey, we want this to be a bigger part of your strategy as a system, as your communications. I think public affairs benefits, and what Conor was saying, it benefits of telling your value. And many of the activations BPD has done that hit on public affairs, and something we're trying to look at doing more is like, hey, we're doing a merger acquisition. We don't know the state attorney general in the state we're going to. We're going to need their approval. We're going to need to do a public forum. Hey, we don't know the lawmakers there. Hey, there's some really bad bills coming, nurse staff ratios, CON changes for hospitals. A lot of folks don't even have the relationships, what Shawn's talked about, to go to the door, go to the chief of staff and like start the conversation. So a lot of times you're selling them as part of like, you need to do this to defend or be proactive. But a lot of it too is really around like, this is such a bigger piece of your capabilities. Like you're going to make content, you're going to tell stories about why you're doing something. It is a bigger piece of strategic communications. And I think a lot of folks forget that or think it's just like government work. And they're not connecting the dots of like, no, a lot of this lives and cross connects into PR and communications. And it's such a bigger value set. That's where we spend a lot of time educating clients because they're just very narrow minded on what it is instead of like what it could be and all the different places you can take it.
And Shawn, go ahead and react to what they said. I'd be interested in what you have to say on the topic specifically of educating clients on the need for perhaps a broader campaign that has multiple touch points, but also again, when do you see that PR is not the right partner because they shouldn't be public, or there's not, like we're working with a client now where sure we could get a number of media placements, but it's a state issue and it's going to wrap up very soon. Is that even worth time, effort, and money for the client to try to make an impact? It might be too late. We're not sure.
Yeah. No, I think it's important. And, in a perfect world, you sign a client and you have a path where there's nothing urgent at the moment, right? And
Yes.
unfortunately, but ironically, that's not usually when
Where are
people
those
come
clients?
that's usually not when people come to guys like us, right?
Right.
It's usually when they feel like there's a crisis. And so you have to set back and obviously look at what the crisis situation is or the pressing situation, and then also think more broadly about how can we be building a presence, obviously, whether that's, within the community or within the policymaker space or within the larger media sphere. Certainly you want to be thinking about what are those strategies and how can we be getting our message out there on just as ourselves, but how can we be engaging other like-minded stakeholders? And sometimes the way that can be most effective was when it's stakeholders that you don't always agree with, right? But you are able to find certain opportunities where you do agree with other stakeholders, because that can bring an added effectiveness to your advocacy as well. And so I think that is always trying to help your clients really think through who are like-minded partners, and who are people that you can be engaging with, and what are ways you can be really working to get your message out. With respect to if there's times that I think it's not appropriate to use a PR function or a public affairs function, I think it's when and it's not that it's I think it's when you are faced with those issues that are particularly niche and particularly time sensitive, that PR and public affairs is really not going to support that, because you need to have that relationship to explain the nuance of something that can be highly technical.
Okay.
It can really impact a lot of people, or impact a small group of people very significantly. And that's where a relationship building of a lobbying practice comes into play, where I think you are able to, where you have to be able to come in and explain that in an effective way. And you're really not going to have a PR component to that particular campaign. That being said, if you've done a good job on the back end of building out a presence, I think that then lends credence to a particular issue, even if that's not engaged in a larger campaign as it relates to, public relations or public affairs.
Now, Connor, you had a bit of a different opinion than I did earlier when we were talking on our prep call about, I have a, again, we said this in our white paper, that there's a number of situations where PR is not the right solution. And you push back on some of that. So I'd be interested in hearing, where your nuanced point of view is on when and where PR is not useful in the lobbying component and the lobbying function, and in the, trying to achieve those goals, public policy goals.
Yeah, and where I would agree with both of you is time is certainly a factor. I've always seen PR as a long game, and clients that need to accomplish something in a month or a matter of weeks.
Sure.
PR isn't always the right tool to do that. Now, there's some nuances within that. If they're working in a very high profile issue that's already dominating the headlines,
Sure.
they need PR to activate right away to shape how those headlines are actually reading, then yes, you can do that. Generally speaking, though, PR is very much of a relationship building function, and it takes months to really understand your space, understand your message, build those relationships with whether it's with reporters, influencers, whoever it may be. So I'm aligned with you all there. I think where where I disagree, I think is um, I'm always of the mind that there's never a wrong time to utilize PR. PR is always going to be a useful tool. And in my own experiences with what I'm doing currently, I often tell my clients PR is one of, if not the most important discipline to master in their own business growth. So this is taking, kind of public affairs out of it, because when boiled down, it's really about public perception of your brand, of your issue, of your organization. It's about when you run into someone on the street and you ask them, what do you think of Apple? What do you think of Amazon? What do you think of McDonald's? That answer is the result of what your PR strategy is. And I think the same can be true in policy and public affairs. People think the most important audience in lobbying is
Right.
policymaker and the regulator. And I think that there's certainly a strong argument you can make there, but you have to think about, well, who is that policymaker and regulator answering to? And in most cases, that's the general public. So I think, you can have the most aggressive and well-connected lobbying team in DC, but if that strategy isn't, complemented with a concerted effort to reach those broader audiences, then I really think you're fighting with one hand tied behind your back.
So basically what you're saying is every single brand that might remotely eventually have to touch politics should invest for at least 2 years at least 20,000 a month.
Yeah, exactly. And they should contact Conor at no.
I was going to say medium. My mistake. I'm sorry.
No, but
Well, that's a really good point.
yeah. And I think to boil it down is once you have, assuming this is a long-term strategy,
Sure.
Once you have it aligned on this is our public affairs strategy, this is our, policy objective, that PR team should be working in concert with that lobbying team really early on so that lobbyist,
Hmm.
when that lobbyist meets with the congressperson, they don't only want to be armed with their talking points. They want to be armed with, hey, this isn't just me saying it. This isn't just the industry saying it. This is
Sure.
public support. That's common sense that you need to get behind. I think that's a lot more powerful than, you doing them in separate silos.
So that's a really good point. And I want to, unfortunately, I've got to keep this relatively short today, closer to 45 minutes than an hour, because one of the kids has a doctor appointment or something. But I want to spend our last few minutes here talking about some messaging components of PR. We've talked a little bit about, op-eds, media placements, but one of the things that, Shawn, I want to key on something you said and get Evan's reaction to it. You talked about finding, I forget the exact phrase you used, but those who are more aligned with your message in order to, maybe they're middle ground, right? And you can try to sway them in your direction. But one of the things we do a lot with our op-eds is we might have three authors, that are trying to impact the Trump administration. One's an academic, one's an everyday person, and one's a business person. And maybe the academic, and instead of saying anti this, we might frame it as this is a good solution. And by, you're trying to achieve this goal. This is a better way to do it. So it's not so much overt criticism or overt public pressure in the negative sense. So, Evan, can you talk about how you all really kind of toe that line where your clients, if they're negative against this person, is that going to impact something else in another way or another member of the state legislature? And how do you create those nuances within the messaging?
I think it really goes to when you're setting these campaigns up with your strategy, how you're thinking through the whole thing. I like framing the optimism. I think about crisis communications and work we do with clients. There's a real benefit to you're trying to show some positives and you're not, everything's not, a negative connotation. So I agree with that. I think I think where this can play out, where there's some value, yes, differing op-ed authors, great.
Mhm.
Using platforms like this, LinkedIn,
Mhm.
Mark Rick just came out with their State of the Media report. LinkedIn, I think, was the most trusted social media platform that journalists look at. So think about that same strategy, having, someone who's an ally, having an alliance leader or an association leader post on their LinkedIn. Like, we're getting into thought leadership land, and I hate that term, but
Well, if you have to
what
say you're a thought leader, you're probably not one. But
yeah, so never say it out. Yeah, kind of like Fight
yeah.
Club. There is no thought leadership. But it shows a little bit of diversity and optimism. I think it just comes back to where are you connecting all the dots on these things? Do you have your core message? Do you have your message platforms? Are you
Mhm.
doing those well? Are you actually following those? And like, can people speak to those? And if they can't, or if everyone's just running off, I think of a crisis or a bill comes up or there's something in budget reconciliation and it's going to destroy, Medicaid funding or whatever that is. I think if everyone runs off with their hair on fire and wants to do their own message, like you're going to run into a hell of a problem pretty quickly. So it is very, to use a very good line, it is just getting everyone singing on the same tune because it's important.
And Shawn, when it comes to what Evan talked about, are there voices when you're working as a lobbyist where you can activate, the public affairs PR function, and you know that this voice can be more aggressive. It's a constituent. So their voice, they might not have the money of the medical doctor, but the medical doctor can speak from the academic or experiential expertise, and they have to be a little more, neutral in their tone, but the constituent can be more angry in their framing. How do you find, from a strategic perspective, when you're activating different voices or different platforms, earned media, advertising, social media, et cetera, town halls? Do you find that framing those voices in the right way and making sure everyone is, the one narrative, but maybe it's said 4 or 5 different ways on 3 or 4 different platforms? How are you as a lobbyist involved in that strategic planning?
Yeah, no, yeah, I think obviously as we talk with clients and, we really work with them. I think, you know, to think about, are there ways that you can be engaging people at a ground level? Always, I think those constituents are the ones that are able to say maybe be a little more passionate, if you will, if that's the
Mhm.
a little more aggressive in the messaging. When it comes to the role of a lobbyist and even people at a higher level, I think there's a need to be more, for lack of a better, I mean, you can be saying the same general, citing the same general concerns, citing the same basic message, but you really need to be winsome
Mhm.
and and you really, I think policymakers want to see you as a partner, even if and they want there an opportunity for you to have a dialogue and relationship going forward so that they can talk freely with you if they disagree, and you can talk freely with them if they disagree. And they oftentimes want you to, whether or not you feel you can, they'll obviously they oftentimes look to folks like us to try to deliver certain messages to some of their constituencies in a way that they hope will help smooth things out. Now we can't always do that, but that's obviously something that comes into play as well. But I think it's certainly something that we talk about as we think about strategy development, as we think about stakeholder engagement. I think when you think about those grassroots voices are those ones that can be more aggressive, but it's those grass tops voices that are oftentimes, you know, the C-suite folks and folks who
Mm.
are building those relationships that I think need to be thinking about really operating in a partnership fashion. Not that you can't be passionate, that's not what I'm saying, but that you also need to make sure that you are winsome and really working to meet the lawmaker, make the policymaker where they're at, and try to understand their situation. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but I think they want to feel to to a certain extent understood and respected where they're coming from, and then that provides an opportunity for a give and take relationship and partnership that not only is dealing with a particular issue that's in front of you, but
Mhm.
also is forward looking. And I know Connor talked about the long game, but it is really about having a relationship in the future. And that's oftentimes what we talk about with clients when they have fly-ins, right? They're coming in and they might be really aggressive and passionate on an issue.
Mhm.
But we also try to make sure that we're encouraging them to think about, look, you're building a relationship here. This isn't obviously we want to get a result on this issue, but also you're building a relationship here towards the future so that you'll have the opportunity to present other issues, other challenges in the future, and hopefully you've built that relationship where there's a listening voice and an understanding voice and a view towards partnership, where you will have a policymaker who really wants to help you because they can appreciate where you're coming from.
We've got to wrap up here. Unfortunately, it's a shorter call today, and I'm sorry for that because I actually really want to dive into this more. So maybe do another one in a couple of months here. But I'd love for everyone to wrap up for 30 seconds on the most important thing, or two things maybe, that public affairs can do for achieving public policy regulatory objectives. Conor or Evan, if you want to talk state level or federal, just distinguish those if you think they're worth distinguishing. For me, I'm going to steal one of Conor's points, which is that um, if you believe that your organization is going to eventually be engaged in the political process, engage your PR firm early, because again, if big organization ABC is attacked by a politician, but they've built that trust as an organization long before they were involved in politics, that's a huge buffer. And then second, make sure you use surround sound marketing and branding, whatever you want to call it. Air cover, carpet bombing, Evan called it, many touch points. Make sure that your operation looks more like the envelopes in the first Harry Potter book than just someone knocking on the door all the time, because that gets annoying eventually. Conor, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I liked what Shawn, you said at the end there about building relationships. And I think it's similar to my point about kind of PR being a long game. I think the key takeaway I would provide here is you can't be reactive in today's world. I'm not saying anything new. The world's unpredictable and it's becoming more unpredictable. So,
Mhm.
you can't come to terms with this and come up with a strategy based on an issue that hit you last week. You have to be thinking, I'm going to need these tools at some point, as an organization to succeed, and I need to be nurturing these relationships now. So that's my key takeaway is don't be reactive. Any time spent on this stuff is good time spent.
Evan?
Yeah, my big one is who's in the room if you're not. It's something we talk about
Ooh,
with public affairs
ooh,
all the time. And
Good
our
one.
our our big message is if you're not in the room educating, advocating, showing up, it's
Mhm.
going to be a competitor. It's going to be a
Mhm.
challenger. So just think about if you're not in the room doing those things, who is and who's getting that
Mhm.
face time.
Brilliant. Shawn?
I think, to answer your kind of what are the one or two most important things, I think the two things I would say, and it's ultimately all about sharing your story. So um, building a general understanding of who you are. It may even be divorced from public policy. It probably is better if it is.
Mhm.
I know companies like Amazon and McDonald's were mentioned earlier, and if people are just like, oh, that's where I had great memories having a hamburger as a
Right.
kid. Those are good, the types of things that you want for a client where they engender a positive story. And then when it comes to a specific issue, then you can talk about how does this specific issue affect the story of who we are as an organization, and how does that potentially impede our ability to continue to be a part of that larger story that impacts people's lives. And I think those would be the two things. I think it always comes down to storytelling. I know you guys really, we all do it in different ways.
Mhm.
But I think that's where we see the intersectionality as well between public affairs and PR and government affairs. I think it comes into the fact of how are we getting our story out? How are we familiarizing our people with our clients and what they
Mhm.
do and how they're serving their communities? And then when a crisis hits, when an issue hits, we can talk about, okay, this is what's happening. And that's how it could ultimately hurt our story and hurt the story that is being told in our community if we don't address it.
Well, folks, there you have it. We have Shawn with Chamber Hill out of DC, Evan with BPD out of California, and Conor with Milk and Honey out of, I don't remember.
New York.
New York. Okay, I
Yeah.
apologize. And so we're kind of geographically diverse here, which is always nice. And guys, thanks for